Tonight on Mississippi Insight, the race for president. The Republican convention wraps up with President Trump accepting the nomination and delivering a speech many are talking about. Tonight, reaction to what we saw. A week of back-to-back storms capped by Hurricane Laura that slammed through Louisiana. The toll is just being added up. And there's damage in Mississippi as well. And this comes 15 years after Hurricane Katrina ravaged the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Tonight, the progress that's been made since then. Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with the race for president. Less than 70 days until Election Day, and now both conventions are history. Attention turns to the debates and the final 2 months of the campaign. On Thursday night, President Trump accepted the nomination, delivering a speech to a crowd of about 1,000 people at the White House.
We will defeat the virus, end the pandemic, and emerge stronger than ever before. What united generations past was an unshakable confidence in America's destiny and an unbreakable faith in the American people. They knew that our country is blessed by God and has a special purpose in this world. It is that conviction that inspired the formation of our union, our westward expansion, the abolition of slavery, the passage of civil rights, the space program, and the overthrow of fascism, tyranny, and communism. This towering American spirit has prevailed over every challenge and lifted us to the summit of human endeavor. And yet, despite all of our greatness as a nation, everything we have achieved is now in danger. This is the most important election in the history of our country.
The Republican convention was similar to the Democratic one a week earlier in that it was conducted virtually. To talk about what we've seen from the GOP, we're joined by former State Representative Mark Baker. He joins us now via Zoom. Mark, give us your reaction to what we've seen this week.
You know, it's been a very impressive convention so far. I want to tell you, I think that dealing with all of the COVID things and the moving of the convention and just the various hurdles that have had to have been overcome in this instance, just an exceptional convention so far. Just very powerful, moving speeches and the naturalization ceremony that occurred. Listening to the Attorney General from Kentucky speak, of course, Senator Scott the night before. It's been a very powerful convention. President Trump started it off, and of course, Mrs. Trump, hearing more of, positive America, where we've been and where we're going, and what a great country this is, and what the great things that are occurring to further us along and to make this country great.
Well, Mark, we saw the president's speech from the White House. Give me your reaction to what you heard.
Thought it was powerful that the theme was promises made and promises kept. And he and Ivanka Trump and others eloquently, in my opinion, went over the successes of the Trump administration for the past for this first term, and talked at length about what the obstacles that had to be overcome in this regard to fight to make the change. And the thing that kept resonating home with me is that President Trump and his administration are not only having to contend with the opposite party, but they're also having to contend with the entrenched elites, the permanent bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., that basically take the position that, kind of that philosophy that you have the watch, but we have the time, so to speak, and so we can wait you out. And I think this is a problem that not only President Trump has had to face, but prior presidents. The difference being that President Trump has said, we're not going to accept the status quo. We're not going to let the permanent bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. stifle our agenda. 4 years ago, he acknowledged and said, I'm here because we're here. We made this happen. And that theme that we made this happen resonated 4 years ago, and it resonated last night. I just finished reading John Bolton's book, The Room Where It Happened. And although this was not an intended effect of his book by any means, what he did was reiterate in some 400 and 500 pages just how entrenched the Washington bureaucracy is, and just how entrenched that this attitude of we know better than you permeates all manner of the federal government. And any president coming in is faced with a daunting task, and that is combating and fighting against the opposing party, which is expected and something that we understand occurs. When you come in office, there's another party. You have to deal with that party. You have to try to work where you can, and where you can't work, you have to try to get your votes and get your legislation passed. We all understand that. What we're beginning to really understand that the swamp is not necessarily elected officials who are accountable to their people back home. And look, whoever sends Congressman X to Washington, that district sent Congressman X. So we can accept that, and we have to live within those parameters. But when you're also faced with faceless, nameless party bureaucracy agencies that basically, this level of frozen inertia has kicked in, and they simply will not move in a direction that the president wants, which the people elected him to do. We've got to have a president like President Trump that is unwilling and to accept the status quo, and is going to fight, has fought, will continue to fight for the people that got him elected and for all Americans.
How does this contrast with the Democratic convention last week?
I watched some of the Democratic convention, and the takeaway from that was blame America first. And it got old. It just doesn't resonate when you look at the economy that we had before COVID, and even the V recovery that is occurring now. When you look at the programs that President Trump put into place with Vice President Pence and others, I think of one thing in this COVID response, and we hear from the Democrats about how the Republicans have failed in this response. I want to tell you, the PPP program, payroll loan program, from start to finish, billions of dollars in the pockets of merchants and businessmen and employers throughout this country, so employees could remain working and employers could remain open. That program, start to finish, had money in the pockets of businesses in less than 30 days. Almost a flawless program in place. And from the CARES Act and the money to the states, which has been turned around and put into the Unemployment Trust Fund and other areas to ensure that the economy continues. These are enormous efforts that occurred almost flawlessly, and President Trump and his administration, in my opinion, just do not get the credit that they deserve for implementing these programs so quickly and so effectively.
Domestically, one overarching theme has been restoring law and order, and there have been some comparisons to 1968 when Richard Nixon made a push for suburban voters, touting himself as restoring law and order. Do you feel that that's a fair comparison, and do you see a similar strategy?
I think restoring law and order is whether it's a comparison or not, it's necessary. We are seeing outbursts that we are seeing an attack on our police, law enforcement, that is unprecedented. And the events that are occurring, I was watching the events that at one point CNN apparently mistakenly referred to as violent protests, which in fact they were. Occurring in Wisconsin last night. And I think to myself, where are the police? And the police aren't there because the leadership of that community doesn't want them there. And so the president is sending in the National Guard, and I'm sure he'll be criticized in many corners for doing that. But people are losing their livelihoods through no fault of their own, through no event or occurrence in which they were engaged at all. Lifetime, generational businesses are now out of business, and we're finding this in Democrat-controlled cities and states throughout the country. It's an intentional process that appears to be occurring. They're reading out of the same playbook, and that is chaos benefits Democrats. They've got it wrong. Chaos doesn't benefit Democrats. It doesn't benefit anybody. And President Trump has committed to putting a stop to it, restoring law and order. I trust that he will.
What does the president need to do to make himself the front runner in this race?
I think the president needs to continue to emphasize the fact that he's not from Washington and that he is looking out for us. It seems like this consistent criticism in the media, the liberal elite media, is that the president, he's not from Washington, that it's never been done like this before. And because it's never been done like this before, it's wrong. Well, in truth and in fact, we realize that, for example, the criticism of the utilization of the White House last night for some of the convention events, the speech by Mr. Trump and the naturalization ceremony, the criticism that the president received, when we look back in history, we find that this is something that is unique and has never happened before. It seems like we wake up in a new world when we hear from the Democrats that nothing previous in time happened, and so everything starts from this day forward, and as if there's no precedent. And so, but I think one of the things that President Trump should continue to do, of course, is to talk about the recovery of our economy since he has been president, and talk about the programs that he's been put in place. Talk about the benefits to all communities, not just the African American community, not just the Latino community, but all communities have benefited under his administration.
The polls are showing that there's a small pool of undecided voters that both sides are basically just trying to shore up their base. Do you believe that there is room for people to still make up their minds?
I always think there's a level of undecideds. Now, whether or not they were decided and then became undecided, or whether they've been undecided all along, there are different pools, I think. I tell people, being undecided is an important thing, but fundamentally, where were you 4 years ago? Where are you now? President Trump is running for re-election. So the question is it's a validation of his service for the past 4 years, and the question becomes, does he deserve to be rehired?
Do you see any future Republican stars, and possibly for 2024, that coming out of this convention?
There's always that speculation. People like to talk about, pretty much after the NFL draft, they talk about the next ones that are coming, the next round of superstars that are in college coming forward. Same thing happens in politics. While the convention's going on, we talk and we listen and we think about who the next group's coming. I haven't really looked at it in terms of that. I'm a Mike Pence fan, and I look for continuity from the successes in the Trump administration, but right now we're focused on President Trump and his election, and after that, after he wins in November and takes office and begins his second term, we can look at that down the road.
Former State Representative Mark Baker, thank you for joining us and talking with us and giving us your insight.
Thank you.
When we come back, Hurricane Laura, the latest disaster from the Gulf Coast. Well, this past week saw back-to-back storms hit the Gulf Coast. On Monday, Tropical Storm Marco brushed across Louisiana and Texas. But it was Hurricane Laura that left a lasting impact, a path of devastation that's still being detailed. The storm hit the Louisiana coast as a Category 4 storm with 150-mile-per-hour winds. Several Gulf Coast communities are devastated, and the city of Lake Charles bore much of the brunt of the storm. One man who's lived there for more than 60 years says it was the worst he'd ever seen.
It's like a bomb destroyer. I've been to most of south of Lake Charles, all of Lake Charles, checking on family members' property, power line down, Civic Center down, a lot of damage, downtown, Broad Street, everywhere you go, every single home has some kind of damage. If it's not a tree down on it, it's roof torn off, porches torn down. I have a house that was a tree right through the roof, it's destroyed. So it's worse than Rita.
Mississippi was spared much of the damage from Hurricane Laura. The southwest corner of the state was impacted, places in and around Adams County. 12 News' Anna Ferris talked with one family that had a tree smashed through their home.
The tree in my backyard just decided that it had had enough wind and just was going to fall on the house.
Teresa Vincent has fallen victim to damages left behind by Tropical Storm Laura.
The entire front porch is gone, and the carport is caved in, and it is laying on top of my little car. So my car is history.
Vincent, her son, and another family member were inside their 2nd Street home eating when they heard an unforgettable noise.
I really didn't hear a lot of noise or anything. In fact, as the tree was falling, I didn't hear a lot. But as it hit the carport and came over, I heard all the wood cracking and all.
Vincent says this tree has caused her issues before. Just last week, a part of it fell on her next-door neighbor's home. She tells me she tried to get it removed before, so it wouldn't get to this point.
Threatened with the tree, I have had it hanging over my head for a while. But weather like this, everything's usually, it's pretty sturdy. Thank the Lord. But he was watching over us. Neither one of us were hurt.
WJTV and our corporate owner, Nexstar, are teaming up with the American Red Cross to raise money for hurricane victims. If you'd like to donate, you can find a link to the Red Cross on our website. It's WJTV.com. When we come back 15 years after Hurricane Katrina, we revisit the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Today marks 15 years since Hurricane Katrina. When that hurricane hit in late August 2005, it devastated New Orleans and much of the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It took years to rebuild, and the impact is still fresh in the minds of many. 12 News' Walt Grayson took a trip back to the coast to see what's changed in a decade and a half.
Russell Barrett grabbed his home camera and started shooting when the water started rising in his Biloxi neighborhood. After a while, it seemed like it would never stop. But even with the flooding, he was one of the lucky ones. He still had a home to repair. Not everyone was so fortunate, and not everyone got out, even though the warning said there was another Camille-like storm on the way.
Unfortunately, that was the cause of several deaths because people say, I made it through Camille, I'm not leaving.
The water got up into the attic of this home on the west end of the coast at Pearlington, and the pulverizing storm surge demolished houses over 70 miles to the east at Pascagoula. And there were varying degrees of damage and flooding all the way in between through Waveland, Bay St. Louis, Pascagoula, Long Beach, Gulfport, Biloxi, Ocean Springs, and Goshen. And it's not like there was an easy way to get from place to place either. Highway 90 in many areas, you just had to pick the best lane to drive in, eastbound or westbound, didn't matter. And the bridges were gone. The Bay St. Louis Bridge and the bridge between Ocean Springs and Biloxi. But like a kicked fire ant mound, the coast started rebounding almost immediately.
And we had thousands of volunteers from all over the United States to come help us rebuild. And if it wasn't for them, I don't know where we'd be today.
They said at the time it would be 10 years before the coast would start to resemble itself again. Well, we're at 15 years now, and it more than resembles itself, it's reinventing itself. There's new construction still going on, and sadly, there's still empty lots, like a set of bad teeth between the new buildings.
Everything's going to come back.
The storm also brought out a trait in people, like a turtle sticking its head out of its shell. You don't see it all the time.
The humanity of it, people helping people. People cared.
The scars from the storm heal over time, but people remember the kindness of strangers, and that's an indelible mark left by Katrina that hopefully will stay with the people of Mississippi forever.
And we'll be right back. Thanks again to Mark Baker for joining us. For Ann Affairs and Walt Grayson, I'm Byron Brown. Join us again next week for another edition of Mississippi Insight. Until then, make it a good night.